Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Thompson along with my partner in crime Aaron Quinn. Aaron, how we doing?
I am good, man. There was a little bit of a conversation this week about homerism and content creators, and I got bad news for those folks with the topic tonight. Talking about Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott and their staffs. I'm going to just gush. This is just going to be a love fest for me. I don't know what Greg's got prepared, but this might turn into some real homerism, some OnlyFans type homerism.
Yeah, it's I actually have a challenging question because I've had a position I've held on Sean McDermott for a while that I'm going to ask you if it's still true because I think he may have gotten knocked off the pedestal that I had him on, and you'll understand that when we get to it. But yeah, tonight is an interesting one and something that I've been looking forward to for a while. That we're actually going to be going through, and we were doing our normal rundown of position previews and going through each of the position groups to help you guys get ready for the season, go through the idea of kind of where we stand in each group, who is going to make the roster, special teams, new additions, do we need more? And our man Ian Wiley, who is a fan from the UK, shot me a message and said, hey, a lot of us don't know a lot about the guys who are making the decisions and coaching the team outside of McDermott and Beane. Could you guys do a show on the front office and the coaching staff? And I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was, doing the prep for this, we just talked about it pre-show. There was a couple of ones where we're like, oh, I kind of forgot about him.
Right.
So I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a good quick dive into the guys who run the show here.
Yeah, it's a good exercise. And when you originally said it, I just assumed you were just looking for a filler show for this time of year because it is tough and to continue to make the content through this time of year. But I agree with Ian that it is sometimes you get so caught up that you forget some of these guys behind the scenes. And I think researching for this show and really thinking about what we were going to talk about on this show, I think it really, you look at this staff, and we had that conversation this week about, was Josh Allen good before Stephon Diggs arrived, or did Stephon Diggs make Josh Allen? I think you look at the staff and you hear all the culture talk and the process talk, and it really starts with these two staff, with the front office and coaching staff, and it's littered all throughout both of those staffs of how this culture and how they've grown it to be in Buffalo. And it's just the shining example of that for the organization. So that's one of the underlying kind of themes I think we could talk about, is how they've been able to build this culture here in Buffalo going forward, what has fans so excited.
Well, and, a big theme we're going to talk about is the repeated surprise that all of these guys are back. So the fact that the team went 13-3, went to the AFC Championship game, had a great amount of kind of surprise, and that, hey, I can't believe they made that big of a run, and that, many fans were kind of expecting it, but there was lots of people outside who certainly didn't expect that level of performance. When that happens, the NFL is a copycat league. Normally you see those teams get cherry-picked and pull people away, and obviously we saw Leslie Frazier and Brian Dable and others that we'll talk about tonight interview for jobs. We had multiple guys interview for GM jobs, but no one got picked. So we'll talk about it tonight. I'm only aware of two departures, one in the front office and one in the coaching staff, that we had across the board that, in very minimal impact in the grand scheme of things, which is really fortunate. So I'm looking forward to diving into this. And before we get to it, we do want to mention quickly a new sponsor for the show. So we are now partnering with the folks over at Underdog Fantasy. You'll be able to see that in the show description, in our wherever you're listening to this on podcasts. It's a new fantasy app. You're able to go in, do a lot of the DFS things you see from other sites, but also a lot of cool, private drafts, private leagues. You can play with folks that we're actually going to be doing some stuff. If you haven't had a chance yet, check out the Cover One Fantasy show that we're doing each week as well. If you go and sign up, take the link here or use the promo code Cover1, you get $25 free to play with, to be able to check it out. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've been really impressed with it so far, and really excited to be able to partner with them through the season.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I think it's going to help me to get back into the fantasy realm of things, because I like money. I do, and I want to I want to take yours and all the people listening here through some fantasy football. So I'm excited mostly actually for the interaction. I think it looked like the Slack channel is really interested about it. And I've been trying to organize in the background some of these like fantasy things, and it's hard because everyone was on different platforms and stuff. So it's streamlining this for us all on the same platform, and that's going to be fun to interact with everybody.
Yeah, and we'll have some fun with it. There's nothing more fun than being able to come and show that you're smarter than me. So come and be able to play and prove that you know much, much more about
It's like a
fantasy than I
carnival.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like a carnival game.
yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be a
You can
ton of
know it
fun.
all.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's much more enjoyable to beat someone who thinks they know everything like I do. So it's a lot more fun that way. All right, well, let's dive in tonight, and we'll start right at the top. We'll go through some of the front office guys first before we get into the coaching staff. And it starts with Brandon Beane. Obviously, a guy that people knew his name a little bit, had his run as the interim GM in Carolina. I think kind of thought he was going to get that job, and then he talked about in some interviews that he was a little bit disappointed when they brought in Dave Gettleman and he stepped back into the assistant GM role for a while. And even was in a position there where, as they were going through, it was only a couple months after that they got rid of Gettleman, and I think he was ready to move on and take another role. But obviously has thrived since he got here. No GM is perfect and makes no mistakes. He's had a couple misses on some signings and some picks, but obviously has had way more hits than misses. And a guy like that who always comes across very personable and genuine to me, like seems like a good guy to work with, and is clearly the more lighthearted of the two between him and Sean McDermott. He's the more easygoing of the two. I think he's a really good pair for that, and we'll talk about the other end of that partnership there. But I certainly couldn't be happier to have a guy like Brandon Beane at the helm.
Yeah, and partnership is exactly what the Bills have, and that was my favorite thing going into all of this. Is I think I still count the Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane hiring as happening at the same time. It was just more of a semantics of waiting for that to officially happen, but bringing these two guys in at the same time and them having worked together and being on the same page, and I think you nailed it in that they're opposites of each other, because I think they're both uber competitive, super meticulous. I think they have a lot of similarities, but I think they complement each other very well. And some of that's the approach and touch, right? Like
I could see a lot of good cop, bad cop between the two of them.
Yeah, but it's not an opposite. I think it's a complement to each other. But Beane has done a fantastic job. Obviously, he comes in, and I think what's most impressive isn't that he's done a good job and made Buffalo a competitive team. It's the team that he got when he got here and what he turned that into, and how quickly, when we look back at this, that roster was in shambles. It had talent. It was a really weird situation where you had some aging talent. You probably could have kept that roster together and made the playoffs, right? And like pushed to be a competitive playoff team. They went with the full rebuild ideology, and that hurt. We talked about it for an entire season. That cap, taking all that dead cap is not a fun way to be a GM and prove that you can put together a winning team, so convincing the Pagulas to, hey, this is gonna be tough to swallow, and we'll try to field a competitive team, but it's not always gonna be pretty. And that he made some pretty bad moves right in that middle of that kind of stretch was, I think, where he made some of his worst moves. The Kelvin Benjamin move is one that I think will always be used against them. There's a couple kind of throughout there that weren't great.
Well, and it's interesting you talk about that one, in that was a spur of the moment pivot from their plan. They had a documented plan, and we're like, we didn't expect to be in a playoff run here. Maybe we should go out and grab a guy. So you can tell that when there's been misses, it's been things like that.
Going off the rails. Yeah, and he's, what I will give him a ton of credit for is I think he's honest. Everyone tries to look for the misleads and the smoke screens in his press conferences, and I think he's a pretty honest guy, and he'll be the first to tell you, like, they're not all home runs. Yeah. Some of these things are misses, and he'll be the first to tell you, too, that the guys we're going to talk about coming up here below him are the guys that keep him in line. Like, he has built a great front office, and that works in unison. But I think what is most impressive, and this is why I think Brandon Beane should continue to win these GM awards, because I think you can make a top 5 list and put out on the internet. I think he's in that top 5, and I can make an argument for the Jason Lights of the world. And there's some other guys that maybe you can make an argument ahead of him, but I don't know that anyone took a situation as dire and as tough of a situation to turn around as the Bills were in, and has done things in such a short period of time to get them in contention as a super team that everybody's taken super seriously, as at least in the AFC contender to the Chiefs, and possibly a Super Bowl contender in that short period of time. I think he's got to be in consideration for at least the top 5, even if you weren't a Bills fan.
Yeah. And I think that bit of humility is a big piece for me with Brandon Beane, where it's in two different ways. I think you see it. One, he's open about admitting his mistakes because you see where he redoes contracts. When he's gone back to guys that he signed and works back pay cuts, reductions, and gets back some of that money on guys that he's the one who signed. I think that's a good sign of that. A lot of teams and guys are very hard-headed about that, or won't release a player that they know,
we've seen it with the Bills.
Better off. Yes, we've certainly seen it in the past. Like, hey, it's not easy to negotiate a pay cut for Patrick DeMarco and then also release him and let go a veteran leader and things like that. Also, I think some of the things you see him genuinely delegate. You see some of these videos afterwards where one of the gentlemen we're going to talk about here in a second, is working the phone and is owning those relationships and coming back. And he, maybe Beane has the final yes, go with it, but he lets his guys. They're truly empowered. You hear some of those cheesy corporate phrasing that people use in organizations. He genuinely empowers his guys to go out and be prepared and make decisions, and that's how you get guys to give their best effort, because they feel like, hey, the work I put in matters. So
I think that trickles. One last thought on me too, because I think it trickles through, and the players seem to love this guy. There's always video and the players talking about my guy Beane and things like that, and I think that he just sets, to that the comment you made about where he and McDermott complement each other, is he has more of a nurturing, I think, approach. And that type of approach does allow for people to flourish underneath you. It kind of releases the ego that a lot of the times it's consumed, I think, Buffalo Bills front offices as egos of, hey, this is my ship and we're doing it the way I'm doing it. And I think it's a much more open thing. And I do think there's probably credit that we give to Brandon Beane that should be given to Joe Schoen and Malik, like some of these other guys that we're going to talk about here. Because it's, to me, and this might segue right into Joe Schoen. It's ridiculous, I think, for me that Joe Schoen isn't GM of another football team by now. There's so much evidence for the Bills, so we can jump right into him if you're ready.
Yeah, for sure. And the one piece you brought up, if you want to show a difference between those two and how he handles himself, I don't think Sean McDermott would do the Cousin Eddie video on the 12 Days of Christmas.
Right.
Like, I think that little piece of not taking himself too seriously is a card that he plays really well.
Right.
And that leads into he has mainly, last year was 4 and now it's 3 other guys. So there were 5 kind of at the top of the front office pyramid. Obviously, we're not going to talk about Dan Morgan tonight because he did get a well-deserved
wish him the best of luck.
Job and promotion. He got a promotion into the assistant GM role that Joe Schoen has here. So it is a pecking order in many of these, and you see assistant GM as the number 2. You'll see some director roles depending on overall player personnel, and then pro personnel versus scouting, and it's kind of a hierarchy, and many you kind of see them move their way up that ladder. So in the Bills organization, the number 2 right-hand guy is Joe Schoen. Joe Schoen spent 10 years with the Dolphins and was in a director of player personnel role prior to that. He had connections with both Beane and McDermott in Carolina when they were there during the 2001 to 2008 area. And then being able to go into this role, he truly plays that role of assistant GM. He gets delegated those real tests. You see him negotiating trades. You see him working with other teams. He's making the call on some of these things. The day in 2019 when we signed, I don't know if you guys remember the timing of it, we signed John Brown and Cole Beasley, virtually identical timing. They were happening. It's because Joe Schoen was negotiating with one and Brandon Beane was negotiating with the other, and they didn't want them to know that they were trying to sign both guys, and they were doing it at the same time. You can't do that if Brandon Beane doesn't fully trust Joe Schoen to stick to the values they identified, to be able to stay within the parameters what's there and make a good deal for the team. There's not a lot of GMs who trust somebody else to make that kind of signing. And as you said, like I think it's crazy. He has gotten some interviews, but hasn't gotten a shot to be a GM. And I think it's a matter of time here before we see him get that role. And we're lucky each year we get to keep him.
Yeah, because honestly, you look at obviously for all the reasons we just said with Brandon Beane and who he's established himself to be as GMs go in the league, and winning the award of GM of the year by the media, whatever group that was, Pro Football Network or something. I'm butchering it, but you have a front office that found Josh Allen. That means usually something, because usually if somebody's hiring a GM like the Texans or one of these teams, they're looking for somebody to either develop a young quarterback or that has turned around a team with a young quarterback, and that's what the Bills have. And so for them to only lose Morgan and not lose the guy that's the actual assistant to the GM, because like you said, it's very transparent with the Bills organization, and in all these draft videos that we're talking about, like Shane's right there. He's doing everything that Brandon Beane's doing, and all the combine videos. Every time we're talking about like what free agency is like, and we're getting those inside videos, he's on the phone with guys while Brandon Beane's talking to another player. Like deals are happening, so he's essentially running one of the top organizations in football, the right hand man to the guy running it. I was shocked that we didn't see more traction of even interviews, because we know in the NFL some of this process is, it's that first year you get attention and your name's thrown in, and you're probably not going to get a job that first year, but you're getting the traction for your name, which is what we saw with Brian Dable really this year, right? And we didn't even see that with Joe Shane. So I was super surprised there. Brian Gain, probably another one, even though he had a weird departure from Houston and kind of snuck back here to Buffalo, but he's another guy that I was shocked. Name never even got brought up during all that stuff. So it's lucky for the Bills. I think maybe it being a weird year and the Bills just being sort of in contention long enough paid off to where they were really able to keep their guys in building.
And the way that they handled it, there were two other names who did get interviews for other spots around the league, and that's Malik Boyd and Terrence Gray. So when we lost Dan Morgan, who was in the position of Director of Player Personnel, they didn't technically replace that. They did promote Malik Boyd to a Senior Director of Pro Scouting. So they had player personnel was both sides of college and pro was the position Dan Morgan's in. They did give Malik Boyd a promotion to Assistant Director of Pro Scouting, and then had two. So they took Terrence Gray as the Assistant Director of Player Personnel and Lake Dawson as the Assistant Director of College Scouting. Malik Boyd and Terrence Gray both got interviews as potential GM or assistant GM roles, and now that's kind of the top five in the new structure. Is Brandon Beane, Joe Shane, definitely top two, then kind of a triangle of Malik Boyd as the Senior Director of Pro Scouting, Terrence Gray and Lake Dawson, and the three of them making up that top five in the organization. And that's not even counting, like you mentioned, Brian Gain, former GM of the Texans, Dennis Hickey, former GM of the Dolphins, AJ Highsmith, a very well thought of area scout. Just
Overdorf is still with the team, and Brandon, like, as much as I think he got a lot of the scapegoating towards the end of the Russ Brandon era, and people were fresh, and I was one of the most vocal, like, look at all these terrible contracts, like, get this guy out of here. But Brandon Beane has spoke incredibly highly of him and his knowledge of CBA and contracts.
You can tell in his title. His new title is Senior Advisor to the GM.
Yes. Yeah.
If Brandon Beane didn't value that wouldn't be the case.
Correct. And look at how they cleared house of everyone previously associated to this organization. Like, he's
the only one. He's the only one.
The only remaining person. So that speaks to me volumes of that what we had on Overdorf at least was wrong, that there must have been something else behind the scenes that we didn't see. Because if Brandon Beane values him as much as that, like, he could have found a guy to be that role.
Correct. And I would say it's important to remember Jim Overdorf is not negotiating a contract in the value. He's not deciding, do we pay
he's structuring
this guy
legal.
He's doing, hey, where do we protect the team? He's doing the literal legal part of it of, hey, how do we structure this roster bonus at this time? But the parameters and the overall, the number of years, the money, the dollar amount, the guaranteed money, that's the GM. That was Doug Whaley. That was Buddy Nix. That was other guys. Sure. Those Jim Overdorf wasn't giving out those contracts. He was then
he wasn't a decision maker.
Correct.
Hey, make this contract work.
Correct. Hey, I just negotiated this amount for this amount of money. Go make that a thing. Go figure out how to do that. But he's certainly still a key role there. And I think as you look at this overall, we rattled off that top five. there's another 15 guys that are in the player personnel department as senior national scouts, player personnel coordinators, Blesto scouts, which is like the lower level ones that came on that our guy Damon talked about when he came on for Draft Diamonds, that the Blesto is kind of the initial starting point of where all the documents are. Senior college scouts in all the areas, all the pro areas. It's a big organization underneath there, and that's, all of those are kind of coming up under areas that Malik Boyd, Terrence Gray, Joe Shane are running those pieces of the organization before it rolls up to Brandon Beane.
Yeah, and it's great. I think Brandon Beane was very honest when talking about even the potential of losing a Brian Dable or losing some of his staff, of like, this part of the coach's job, part of his job is maintaining that well to continue to dip into. And so while you're focused on the now, you're also building for the future. And that's, those 15 names they're making a substantial investment in that future. And, we really need to think of this in the same way I talk about the wide receiver room. Like, what a great opportunity for these young wide receivers to come in and learn from Diggs and Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders now. Like, who better? You couldn't pick a better three to learn from for a young person. Now you have that same thing with your Blesto scouts, your scouts that are learning from your Joe Shanes, your Brandon Beans, your Malik Boyds. This is a substantial resource for these young guys. And I think they're going to continue to develop guys that we continue to hear about in this group. I think it's a nice, diverse group of leadership at the front office, and I feel confident. I think they'll start to get plucked one by one over the next few years here. But we talked about that kind of pyramid at the top, and then later we're talking about Dennis Hickey and Brian Gaines. I think Brian Gaines is secretly still up here in that top group, because before he left for the Texans, he was in that top group.
He has the most ambiguous title. It's senior personnel advisor.
Well, the train
kept moving,
one. And then he jumped back on the train, and so they just kind of plugged him in a spot. Like, here's a title, have your old office back, type of thing. But I think he's very much still in that top tier. So if they lose a guy, I think that is a pro-ready guy that's been hired by another team that you can plug in, and Hickey's right there too.
I'll give you guys two other names to pay attention to that are very likely names you're not familiar with, that you can tell when they did the recent list of restructuring. Most people had heard Malik Boyd, Terrence Gray, Lake Dawson. Those are names that a lot of Bills fans had heard, or many plugged-in fans were aware of. Two more that got promotions to assistant director roles that weren't on a lot of people's radar is Chris Merrow and Curtis Rukavina.
Never heard of them.
Those are two names that separated themselves from those other 15 and were promoted into assistant director roles that, in the way that organizations run succession planning, just plant that seed, tuck that away in the back of your mind. The names Chris Merrow and Curtis Rukavina, those are two names that we'll probably hear more of in the future.
Assistants to the regional directors? Or...
They had to white it out on their business card. Assistant Director of Pro Scouting for Team Advances and Assistant Director of Pro Scouting for Free Agency. So one of them is probably like a finance nerd like I am. So I'm sure Curtis Rukavina and I would get along really well. Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so now we have gone through the front office. We will now pivot over to, obviously, people talk a lot about who's really at the head of the organization. And I do think that, it's probably 51-49 Sean McDermott in my mind. I think Sean McDermott leads the organization, but I think that they partner very well. And I think that Brandon Beane doesn't try to get too into the day-to-day running of the team, and I don't think McDermott tries to force himself into too much of the personnel side of it, but you see them there. They're involved in both sides of it all the time. And Sean McDermott, has set the tone for this organization, and I kind of did a little, tease of it early on. I've made the case that Sean McDermott is the single most valuable asset in the Pagula portfolio, and that he turned around their organization and greatly increased the value of their franchise. And that, do you think Josh Allen has surpassed that?
No.
Or is Sean McDermott still the most valuable asset to the organization?
I think that these are the same type of conversations as did Diggs make Allen better, or did Allen make Diggs better? I think Sean McDermott's a good coach no matter where you put him. I think he's got the right makeup of what makes an NFL coach successful, good at their jobs, because he's a smart football coach, but he's a good leader of an organization. He's a good CEO.
Incredibly
of an organization.
disciplined, incredibly detail oriented,
meticulous. Yeah, but he's not a total jerk. He doesn't have that like I'm going to just run everybody and you're either kind of with the process or you're out. Although he talks about the process all the time, but I think he takes influence from his other coaches. I think that he's open to these conversations with Brandon Beane. I think he's open to being wrong about things. Like he's not Rex Ryan. He's not coming in and I'm the smartest guy in the world and we're doing things my way. So I think he'd be fine anywhere. I think Brandon Beane would be fine anywhere. But I think the two of them together is what creates the magic. I think that for Bills fans for so long, when we were the Bills were searching that coaching search, I had done a graphic early in my graphic days of a timeline of their coaches and GMs and quarterbacks throughout the drought.
So depressing. I remember
and it's so bad, and there's just crossover everywhere. And for these guys to line up coming in together and having had work together and have a shared vision of what creates a successful franchise, whether or not you agree with it or not, or you don't like the coach speak or not, I think that combo of having two guys sharing the same vision is really where you create success in the NFL, because you can have a really good coach and then have a GM going rogue doing some others. Like you have to have a symbiotic relationship between the two. And that does require one of them to have less ego. And we touched on that a little bit with Brandon Beane, that I think just enough that competitive desire, but not overly ego needing the spotlight or needing to be the guy that's responsible for making this happen has been a nice compliment. Where I'm not saying Sean McDermott's an egomaniac, but I bet he does.
I bet he's a little bit more of what you'd call a control freak, type A. Little bit more. They talk about how crazy competitive Brandon Beane is, and I believe that. But that I do bet that McDermott's type A OCD type tendencies are probably a little bit more in wanting control of things.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's close. I think there's a fine respect. But I think it's easier to have those things when the shared vision exists, and that everybody, even if you have a maybe slight disagreement on the nuance of part of the plan, the vision of the plan is the same, and that's really all that matters. And so I don't know that Sean is more valuable than Brandon. I think it's the combo that they hit on of bringing these two guys in, right? And I'm telling you right now, when they were sitting down with Sean McDermott, he's going through his notebook of stuff, Brandon Beane's ideas and thoughts, and I guarantee you that's what Sean McDermott was pitching to the Bagulas, is like, there's this other guy, we'll work great together. You'll have a continuity across the front office. They just got rid of having Rex Ryan, who was trying to do his own thing, and with Doug Whaley getting in pieces that didn't even work for his system. Total shit show. To have, hey, let's have some real continuity with two super competitive, highly meticulous guys. So anyway, long story short, I agree somewhat with what you're saying, but I think it's the symbiotic relationship of the two that makes each of them so valuable to this organization. But Josh Allen himself has not surpassed that.
Yeah, I agree. And I it's getting close. But the great part is we're not going to have to choose between the three. We're going to have all three of them together for a long time to come.
Yes. Yes.
So let's go down. We'll kind of separate this, obviously, into the different spectrums. First, we'll start with the quickest one, which will be on the special teams. Having special teams coordinator Heath Farwell last year was his second year. Obviously, we saw a big step forward, especially in the kicking game. Real solid step forward there. There's still, I think, some more to be seen there. Matthew Smiley is the assistant special teams coach underneath there. It's his fourth year with the Bills, and a guy who's kind of been behind the scenes there. And I think we have a slightly above average, special teams coaching group. I don't know that it's special. I don't know that we're getting some huge advantage over other teams, but I think Farwell's solid, and that I'm looking forward to another step forward here in coverage units and how he handles the return game, because the last 2 years, it's not that hard to say, hey, Andre,
best guy in the league.
Go do that thing that you do. This will be a much bigger showing for Heath Farwell of how he handles that return game replacement now that he doesn't have Andre Roberts.
Yeah, I think you nailed what is most important for him, because I don't know who the returner is this year, right? There's a lot of spotlight when we talked about it
Yeah, McKenzie, Stevenson, Breida,
who's it going to be? And that's going to be
Brandon
fun.
Powell.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch this summer, but in the back of my mind, it's also not fun that I don't know who it is. And that some of that's on the coach. Like he hasn't been able to get Isaiah McKenzie to be that guy yet that we're confident is going to take that job. And so I'm a little torn on Farwell here because I liked what I saw last year. It was a top special teams unit, but Brandon Beane's given him maybe more so than other teams around the league, top special team. Like we have carved out roster spots for Taiwan Jones's,
Tyler Matakevich. We paid good money for Tyler Matakevich. We paid good money for Andre Roberts.
Absolutely. And they are developing their own. I think Siran Neal, who Rob Quinn just did a great piece talking with Siran Neal. And we can
make
touch
sure
on
you guys check out that.
later.
We'll put that in the show description here. Awesome article and interview that Rob did.
We've seen him continue to take a jump. I guess where I am with Farwell is that I don't know if he's year one guy or if he's year two guy. And I think this is the year to find out is now. Andre Roberts is gone. I think it takes away some of that comfort and that cushion. He has to develop a returner for this team that's hopefully going to be the returner for a few years here and kind of put that to bed. And hopefully it's a guy that he can develop that can take that one role that we've been looking for that could be a contributor on offense and do that. But I would like to see continued development of their own guys and not these having to pay high prices for special teams guys where you can just, get a guy that I think potentially has the ability to be a real special teams ace in Siran Neal and develop those guys. And that'll tell me who he is. So if we continue to see our own develop into special teams players, I think that we probably have a good thing. But right now, I'm unsure of what we're getting out of the coaching of that unit because they've invested quite a bit there.
Well, and as Patterson brings up here, there were areas that were gaps that we didn't see a lot. And, obviously we saw the flash against Miami with Isaiah McKenzie. That's going to be a big part of it with Heath Farwell here is, developing Isaiah McKenzie will cost us money moving forward. If he can do the same work with Marquez Stevenson, who we have 4 years of a rookie deal on, that's a lot more financially savvy to do that. And I trust it. That's not going to be the reason that he goes with one over the other. If they're equal going into cutdown day, that could be a tiebreaker for Brandon Beane. But that would mean that Heath Farwell had to tell them, hey, we have no difference. Stevenson and McKenzie are equal. I'm good either way. If he goes back and says, hey, I do think Stevenson has the future in it, but I would feel more comfortable with McKenzie
today.
He's going to go with that, and he'll have that kind of cut for it. But that's going to be the biggest thing that I watch from Heath Farwell and for this special teams unit, along with, like you said, can he turn Jaquan Johnson into one of those guys? Can he turn, any of the newer, Rashad Wildgoose or something like that?
Yeah, special teams, right? Who knows? Yeah, and I think one thing that is important and to judge him is I think he has a pretty substantial say in when he pounds the table for a guy, or if he is going to make a case for a guy on the roster. I think that they listen to him quite a bit, and so that says something to what the coaching staff and Brandon Beane, I think of him.
Yeah. So now let's switch over. We'll do the defensive side of the ball first. So on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of names that we're going to get excited about here. We'll start with Leslie Frazier. Leslie Frazier is the defensive coordinator and assistant head coach. Rightfully got attention for head coaching jobs. And I will say I was surprised and disappointed he didn't get a shot in Houston, where I thought what they really needed was a well-respected adult in the room to kind of just take hold of that organization and just bring some class and respectability to what they have going on. And the fact that they went with David Culley, who no one sees as a head coaching caliber coach, was really confusing. So I thought it was a shame. I thought that was, Leslie Frazier is not a buzzy name. He's not a name that's going to sell a ton of tickets and get a ton of headlines. He is a great leader. He is incredibly well respected around the league. The Bills are incredibly fortunate to have him as the assistant head coach and to be able to do the things he does. He actually had a pretty successful run in Minnesota. He had an above 500 record.
The front office was not very good in Minnesota too. They had left him high and dry there.
Correct, and they all kind of got hacked at the same time, and he somehow just never got a second chance to be a head coach anywhere.
Right.
I'm happy that we have him. I think that he meshes well with Sean McDermott and what they want to do together. And, I'd love to see him get another shot. And honestly, after that Houston situation, that was about as perfect as it could get. I don't know that I see Leslie Frazier getting the chance he deserves.
Yeah, he dodged a bullet with Houston because screw the McNairs. They don't deserve nice things.
Yes,
not our nice things. But yeah, no, I am still baffled at how during the year everyone just jumped the gun to start. And I love Brian Daboll, and we'll talk about Brian Daboll, but everyone just jumped the gun that he was the hot Bills assistant. And to me, it just doesn't make sense that name came up before Leslie Frazier. I think Leslie Frazier has a bigger body of work at the NFL level of proven success, not just with the Bills, but outside of the Bills. He has had proven success, and then he's replicated that success here with Sean McDermott and the Bills. Players love him. You hear nothing but great things. He's awesome with the media. You can hear the way he talks about the game and talks about teaching these players. He's a true teacher of the game. Yeah. And I think maybe his most important quality when Sean McDermott was building this staff, he brought in guys with experience like Leslie Frazier to lean on. But I think we talked about it with Brandon Beane and the lack of ego. I think Leslie Frazier being able to really still have Sean McDermott's hand all over this defense is difficult. I think you get to the certain level. We talk about the guys that get to these levels of NFL jobs. These guys have massive egos, all of them. Even the ones that we're saying their egos are a little bit timid. Leslie Frazier thinks highly of himself and thinks highly of his ideas. And to work under a guy like Sean McDermott, I've worked under these types of people, these personalities like Sean McDermott. It's super difficult. It really is. Like they're difficult. There's a lot of pressure. They want to control a lot of the stuff, and you have to remove your ego from some of that. So that again is a great relationship. We've seen Sean McDermott take over play calling, or at least really have a hand in it during the games on the sidelines, speaking the plays into the microphone, and Leslie Frazier being okay with that and dealing with that in the press and dealing with those questions and continuing on and moving on with the game plans. And it's never once fractured their relationship. If anything, it's probably increased their trust in each other. And so having a guy like that one has the experience, has been a head coach, has been a player in this league. We talked about the years of experience in the NFL with the front office of all those guys having 20. Leslie's got to be like 30, 40 years in now of NFL experience. This is an incredible resource for the Bills to be able to maintain. But I thought it was a huge disservice to who Leslie is and his impact on the game and the type of leader he is that he wasn't even getting talked about until that Texans interview came up.
Yeah. And as we go through the rest of the defense here, I'm going to go quickly over some names that I think, obviously we saw Eric Washington get brought back from the connection in Carolina. He was the defensive line coach underneath Sean McDermott, took over as the defensive coordinator there when they fired everybody with Ron Rivera. They, fired the entire staff. Right. Washington was brought back to be the defensive line coach here. I'm really interested to see. This will be another year forward with guys like Epinesa and Oliver, what he does with the rookies. This will be a big year to see how he does. You saw some of the innovative ones that we saw, like Jim Salgado being the nickel coach and specifically working with Taron Johnson, and was before probably Dean Marlowe. I'm curious to see what they do and if they're able to pull, a little bit more out of some of those guys in different areas. I think that some of the guys like John Butler as the overall defensive backs coach is solid, and Bobby Babich is a safety, but really the gem of that defensive unit underneath Leslie Frazier is Bob Babich, and I'll let you speak about your man that you think so highly of.
I was in a tailgate. I got a tailgate from somebody. They were parking in the stadium parking. I saw Bob. I was walking to a porta potty, and I saw Bob Babich on the way out. And I'm not like a guy that like scream. And I was like, Bob Babich, I love you. And he was just like, I'm sure he was shocked that somebody even recognized him in the parking lot. But Babich, I think, is fantastic of a coach. He's one of these guys that knows his role in the NFL. He's a position coach. He's a linebacker coach. He'll go down as one of the best ones to do it, like a Callahan along the offensive line. One of these guys is just good at his job.
Dante Scarnecchia just
is another
plenty of opportunities. Just nope. I coach offensive line. That's what I do.
Yeah, and the Bills are blessed, again, to have this guy with this massive experience. And Bills have invested a lot into that position. Yeah. And this is a big year for Babich because we like how Milano's come along. I think that a full healthy season for Milano will see him as the player Babich has developed him into becoming. But Tremaine, obviously, we've seen ups and downs in his progression, but he really needs to have Tremaine taking that next step. So that's one that I'm really interested in. I think a lot of pressure is on him. Yeah, we touched over Eric Washington. A ton of pressure is on Washington. You got Jerry Hughes left. There's some juice there. You need to find Jerry's replacement this year. And we've given you a lot of opportunities of young assets on this roster. Fix that, fix the future of this defensive line. So there's a lot of pressure on both those guys here going forward. And I'm interested to see how they respond. I loved the piece with Dotson talking about what Bob Babich has meant to him in his career and some of the struggles that he's gone through as a young guy. And to hear him talk about the coach that way, these guys go through so much in terms of developing these young players. And you think about how much time Bob Babich has put into a Terrell Dotson. Dotson might never become a really good NFL player. And I think that we forget that when we're talking about some of these positional coaches and guys that are down on the bottom of the roster who really got their hands on every single one of these prospects at the macro level or at the micro level here with them all the time, and what type of influence that can have. And we heard Dotson talk about it. Like, Babich has been a big part of not only who he's becoming as a man, but developing his game on the field. And hopefully that takes root here with Tremaine Edmunds going forward, because that's the piece that's missing right now. Is if Tremaine Edmunds takes that next step, man, that's huge. And I've said it since they drafted Edmunds. If there's one guy in the league that can turn him into the potential that he's supposed to be, it's going to be Bob Babich.
Well, and obviously the example you want is the 9 years that Bob Babich spent as the linebacker coach and defensive coordinator in Chicago, where he was there through the beginning and rise of Brian Urlacher.
And Lance Briggs. Briggs was no joke.
But the idea of Urlacher was also one of those, like, not the exact prototypical fit, like way taller than middle linebackers normally are, and had to figure out how do we use this special athlete in this role that isn't stereotypically built for him. Right. There's so many similarities there with Tremaine Edmunds, and we need to see it this year. Like, we need to see that step forward to be able to do it.
And one more, how much of an importance those types of coaches are. When Brian Urlacher got inducted into the Hall of Fame, Bob Babich is the one that introduced him. And that, like, a lot of times it will be a head coach or something, but that is how influential he was to that progress that you said. And so I hope that someday that's Tremaine, when he's inducted into the Hall of Fame, Bob Babich is giving his speech too.
That's right. So let's switch over to the offensive side of the ball. And there's some exciting things here that I want to talk about because, like we said, I don't expect Leslie Frazier to get a job. If he did, I wouldn't be shocked if Bob Babich was asked to be the defensive coordinator. I wouldn't be shocked if Eric Washington was asked to be the defensive coordinator. But ultimately, it's Sean McDermott's defense. And who the defensive coordinator is not going to materially change the style and approach of the defense. It would be a deserved promotion for a Bob Babich, but it's not going to shift what they do. On the offensive side of the ball, obviously I think Brian Daboll had one job that he wanted this offseason. I think it was the Los Angeles Chargers, and that it went to Brandon Staley. And once that happened, we know he pulled his name out of the Houston job. He could have had that if he wanted, but nobody wants that job. But I think he had his heart set on one job. He had a chance to go there with his high school teammate to go out to LA and to work with another young, strong-armed, athletic quarterback. But thank God we get Brian Daboll back, and we're going to get a fourth year with Brian Daboll at the helm of this offense. Josh Allen's fourth year with the same system, the same language, the same structure that shattered every offensive record last year for the Buffalo Bills. Over 500 points for the first time in franchise history. I'm obviously was an unapologetic supporter of Brian Daboll to the point that I finally asked our friend Drew over at Rock Power Report to stuff it and to put his money where his mouth was with a bet because he was so concerned with Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll's performance down the stretch in the second half of the year and into the playoffs was fantastic. And I can't wait to see what he unlocks this year, what he goes with. And I couldn't feel more confident in somebody else making the calls and calling the plays for the Buffalo Bills, and how he sets that up is going to be exciting to see. But I think the floor is very, very high with him at the helm of this offense.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I think the most interesting part to me is obviously being able to keep him is a huge luck of the draw for the Bills this year. I think it's a matter of time. I think they'll have similar success this year on offense and have a productive offense.
They might not break all those records again, but it's still going to be pretty.
He'll have a nice productive offense to continue to build up a resume with. But I think the relationship with him and Josh is very special. And I think we get fed a lot of PR stuff from the team every year, and we'll hear about, this guy worked on this and they work with that. But I think
might have lost Aaron there for a moment.
There we go. You there?
We got you back.
Yeah. The egos yield, I think, a little bit to each other, and you see a lot of offensive coordinators come in and say, hey, we're running this thing. We're running it the way I know how to run it. You hear the conversations that Allen and Daboll have with each other and how that's translated. You hear Beasley telling him what he's comfortable with. And we saw that Eric broke those down and how those translated to touchdowns. So he's yielded his own ego to get the benefit of this. And I think the way Josh talks about the friendship that they have, that they're really best friends, they talk all the time, and not just about football. They're just talking about each other's family, talking about golf. Like, there's something special about it, and to be able to keep it in place for another year. You heard about Stephon Diggs, the way he was talking about Daboll coming right in, like, we can't lose this guy. He's the most important thing to this offense, so it makes it tick. So getting another year, and I think it gives Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott an additional year to continue to groom people under him, because it's just a matter of time before you're losing him, and we know they want to get people in there. So whether it's Ken Dorsey, maybe we'll see this summer him getting a little play call action during training camp to kind of be a little bit more by Brian Daboll's wing. But I think you'll start to see guys maybe more mentoring under Brian Daboll for that potential job here, probably next year.
Well, and you see that same hierarchy that if you're going to build a succession plan right now, it goes Sean McDermott. I think hands off the majority of the offensive leadership to Brian Daboll. I don't think that Sean McDermott tries to insert himself too much other than timeout usage, critical decision-making things of go for it, not go for it. But he's not trying to call plays on offense. Like he lets Daboll run that, and the hierarchy goes where you connect from Daboll to Josh Allen. In between there, you have Ken Dorsey and Shea Tierney. And if it was me and I'm building a succession plan of how that works, I want Shea ready to take over as the full-time quarterback coach. I want Ken Dorsey getting experience, because we know he's been an offensive coordinator, or he's been a quarterback coach. He's been in those positions. He has not had game-ready playmaking responsibility. I'd love to see a little bit of that, and whether that's preseason games, whether that's
just at camp. Yeah.
Side-by-side experience in camp, some of the scrimmages, get some of that stuff going when you know you can get ready for it, because then you can keep the same language in the fifth year for Josh Allen. You can keep the same system. You can keep those things going and not have to rock the boat, where you could just simply have Ken Dorsey step up and Shea Tierney step up and be in a great position to be able to do that. And everybody will say, and just bring in Jordan Palmer. Jordan Palmer makes a ton of money hanging out on the beach for the summer. He doesn't need to do that. But in my mind, that's how I would build that succession plan and what I hope is going on.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure there's some other names within.
Sure. And we got two other ones we'll bring up here in a moment.
Yeah, there's some other names, but I think what most importantly about a succession plan is it impacts these other groups that we're about to talk about. It allows you to keep your Chad Halls. It allows you to keep your Bobby Johnsons in place, because there's not, again, when we talk about egos, a coach rarely is going to come into a situation to be the OC and keep the entire staff. Like that would be you'd have to find the right person willing to do that and keep the offense the same. And that's a tough fit. So to have somebody that is within your system to come in and maintain the system, I think it is a natural fit. And I think that it lends itself well, especially when you already have a successful offense, right? Like you have a system that we know the personnel fits, we know it. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's continue to keep that and build off of that. I think that succession plan is the ultimate idea, and it sounds good and it sounds like it should work. But everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Like until we see Dorsey become an NFL offensive coordinator, I don't know that plan is seamless.
There's no guarantee that he's a great play caller. We don't know that. So
or a leader of the people underneath him. You don't know
to lead the room.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into coaching that isn't just, hey, this guy's got to call these plays on this day. You've got to put other people in position to also be successful.
Yeah, so we'll see where it goes. Some of the names floating around before we get to those big two. Rob Boris as the tight ends coach. I think he's fine. Had some roles.
Play calling.
Yeah, he was an actual offensive coordinator, play caller with the Rams. Yeah, not a great offensive coordinator, but it was an offensive coordinator in Cleveland and with the Rams. You have a couple guys floating around. Kelly Skipper doesn't get remembered a lot. He's the running backs coach, and
should probably talk about him more often.
I'd like to see a step forward from the running backs this year. I'd like to see a little bit more there. He's going into his 5th year and was actually one of the few holdovers that Sean McDermott kept from the previous regime. There's not very many coaches on this staff that are going into year 5 or more. Almost everyone was new under McDermott or was brought in since then. So I'm curious to see where that goes. And then a couple assistants we'll talk about here that go along with it. Ryan Wendell supports and is the assistant offensive line coach to Bobby Johnson. Bobby Johnson, I think, is one of the two that would be there alongside Ken Dorsey as an option. There was some talk of maybe him being kind of a running game coordinator. Some teams do a structure like that. He's been the offensive line coach for 2 years now, going into his 3rd year with the Bills. I think he's done a solid job. I think that when you see the Bills make a run with guys like Ike Botker as a key piece going to the AFC Championship game, you need to give some credit to a guy like Bobby Johnson. The step in, you see the development we've seen from Deion Dawkins the last 2 years, really stepping forward out of maybe not a great second year, and the consistency we saw from Darrell Williams. The big piece I want to see is, can he help turn Cody Ford into a reclamation project? Can he solve that guard spot and get the most out of what we think is probably average NFL talent at the guard spots? Can he get some sustainability and consistency at that spot? I'd love to see that step forward from him at the offensive line between Bobby Johnson and our man Ryan Wendell.
Yeah, what I'm concerned about Johnson is I don't know how much his teaching was part of the development of Deion Dawkins or not. I think Deion Dawkins was going to be a pretty good player. Either way, I'm not sure. But I don't know where Bobby Johnson is as a developer of young talent, right? And I think that so far they've missed on the interior offensive line. We saw what happened. Wyatt Teller goes away and he becomes excellent. Not saying that that's a Bobby Johnson fault, but Wyatt Teller's very good now, and obviously that's something that we probably should have talked about with Brandon Beane as one of the hindsight misses of Brandon Beane's run here. But I think that a lot of pressure is on Bobby Johnson this year. When we talked about Eric Washington, I think Bobby Johnson's in the same position where they've invested quite a bit into this offensive line of bringing in Mitch Morris, giving Deion Dawkins his money, giving Darrell Williams his money.
Even none of that. Feliciano got real money.
Yeah, Feliciano got real money. That's probably my biggest issue right now with Bobby Johnson is I think he's too in love with guys like John Feliciano and Ike Botker, and I don't know that he's able to develop the talent to come and take those jobs from what I think is probably below average NFL interior offensive line. And we were talking on Twitter with our friend Mark Ryan about, I think you have to probably be above average to be a consistent NFL starter in this league, or at least adequate. And I think, like Feliciano hovers there, but I think Bobby Johnson thinks he's
There's a reason Brian Winters was still playing into Week 10 last year. If we had some immediate answer who was better, we wouldn't have had that many games for Brian Winters.
Yeah, so I the verdict's out for me on Bobby Johnson. I have a lot of faith. I think, obviously, Dawkins, there's probably, I don't know how much he has to do with it or not. I think Dawkins would be a good player, but you have to give him some credit because he has grown under him. So there's something to say there. I'll give him, this year to see what we can get out of Ford and Feliciano, but I don't know how much he's part of the future of the amount you've invested and trying to fix some of these spots. I think Ford's going to be really his big project. I don't know that you can pin everything on Ford, but I think he has to get something out of it. Or a Forrest Lamp, resurrect a Forrest Lamp.
I don't want to give the impression Bobby Johnson's on the hot seat. I don't think that he's coaching for his job. I think that he could do another good job and continue on. I do think there is pressure. I do think there are expectations.
He's not going to be the OC if he can't develop these guys. Like if they don't have a good...
he won't be in the discussion at all if that happens. And there is a level of expectation that he needs to take a step forward to be in the running for that kind of legitimate keeping his job as a head offensive line coach and not being this is the first time he's been a head offensive line coach and not an assistant offensive line coach or a assistant tight end coach and things like that. So there is expectation to go forward. One of the other guys that I think is a rising star, in my opinion, in the coaching ranks is Chad Hall.
Yeah.
And, Chad Hall was an NFL player only 6 years ago, and has moved up pretty quickly. He had his first time coaching opportunity with the Bills as, one of those offensive quality control coaches, and now has moved up the last 2 years. This will be his third year as a wide receiver coach and being the primary wide receiver coach. And I think when you look at the way that guys like John Brown and Cole Beasley have been utilized and had career years, you look at the way that obviously he didn't make Stephon Diggs good, but Stephon Diggs had a career year. You look at how quickly Gabe Davis contributed and moved up. I think Chad Hall is a really good coach, very, very good at what he does. And he's a sneaky one that I could see in the running for that, whether it's a replacement of Brian Daboll, whether it's stepping up as a passing game coordinator or some kind of split role semi-promotion, or at risk of losing him to another organization as an offensive coordinator. He's a guy that strikes me as having that kind of upward mobility in future ahead of him because of how quickly he's taken to this and how well he's done it.
I agree. I think for his sake, though, I think he's got all the sort of what you're looking for in a young up-and-coming guy. He's excited.
He's also been given
passion.
phenomenal ingredients.
Yeah. And so this one's tough for me because I think he's actually probably best suited to be a wide receivers coach. I think like a Bob Babbage. Like, I think he's got passion for it. I think he loves the position.
Oh, yeah.
And he's, in my opinion, I don't know how good of a coach he is. I don't scout the coach, and I'd have to probably ask Eric Turner. He probably knows more about what exactly he's teaching these guys, but he's got a good room to work with. But what's important about managing, especially wide receiver rooms, again, back to egos. The wide receivers have some of the biggest in the NFL, and managing a room with interesting personalities that have massive egos and sort of being their hype man and being the guy when they're having some time that's down and keeping them going and keeping them focused. You need a guy that's wired like a Chad Hall. You watch touchdowns, long plays. Chad Hall's the first guy down the sideline running with his wide receiver step for step, hyping them up the whole way down the field. Like, this guy loves exactly what he does. And I think his best asset, in my opinion, is I think that he's an advocate for the wide receiver room in Brian Daboll's ear, and communicating what they're doing in practice and talking in their room and communicating that with Brian Daboll and putting those plans together and getting Beasley open and getting Diggs where he's comfortable and working all that out with Josh Allen. I think that's where his role is probably the biggest, is being the advocate for a room full of great players. But we saw a nice development out of Gabe Davis in year one, and I think that we're going to see that out of Hodgkins here coming along this year. We're excited to see that development. And then we get to see even more with a Marquez Stevenson. If he can turn that piece, we talked about, Heath Farwell having control into where he's going to be as an NFL player. But I think that if Hall can turn him into a gadgety player, a productive wide receiver, that really fills a role for the Bills. So
huge.
They've invested some into his tutelage that, with these vets that he's got, bringing in some of these young guys that he can invest some of his time there and hopefully get this next generation of Bills wide receivers, because Josh Allen's going to be here for the next 10, 15 years as a Buffalo Bill. Stephon Diggs won't be, right? Like, these other guys will not. So you have to continue to give guys like Chad Hall talent. So I think he's best as staying as a wide receiver coach, and hopefully he's there with the Bills long term. But you're right. I think that somebody's going to see this young, passionate, fiery coach that's his unit's very productive, and that's going to be attractive. His name will come up as a guy if the Bills receivers continue on the trajectory they've been on.
No, I think you're spot on, and that hopefully it's because we're maintaining him and keeping him and not losing him. But we'll see where that goes. And I will say, I think this is, of all the crazy things that get thrown out there, of like, oh, we should go have Jordan Palmer be
Kyle Williams should be our defensive.
Yeah, Kyle Williams go. The least crazy of those things is that hierarchy I said with the four ones. Is that Shea Tierney?
Sure.
That he becomes the assistant quarterback coach to quarterback coach Shea Tierney. That's the least crazy of the player things that get thrown out there. They've talked about the fact that he knows his future is in coaching. He's just getting his tutorial and his apprenticeship while he's technically on a preseason roster and a practice squad roster during the year. He knows that he's never thrown a ball in the NFL. He's never thrown one regular season football, but he knows that he has a career in football because of his ability from a leadership standpoint to do those things. He certainly
if I was
knows.
him, I would just go do what Jordan Palmer does. But go ahead, go get into coaching.
Yes.
By all means, work harder for less.
Yeah, go live on the beach and become a quarterback guru, because that seems like a good gig. That seems like a pretty good gig. So that kind of takes us through everything here tonight and where we've gone for the front office and the coaching staff and our man Ian Wiley. We appreciate the idea. I thought this was a really fun discussion to be able to go through and to kind of talk about how fortunate the Bills are to be able to maintain all of the talent that they did. And, you know, I talked about the fact that there was very, very little turnover. Literally, it was Dan Morgan on the front office side and our assistant linebacker coach that we lost to a college opportunity, John Agregwu, and then a guy that I don't think a lot of people knew was on the coaching staff before we lost him. And then, not assistant linebacker, assistant defensive line coach, and he was replaced by Jacques Césaire, who was a former NFL lineman. There really wasn't any turnover. We lost very, very little in being able to do that, and that's pretty rare with how good the, Bills season was and how many people were interviewed and considered for things. I don't know that it's realistic to assume we're going to be that lucky again next year. And I think that we really need to appreciate and be excited about having everybody back this year and kind of being prepared and bracing ourselves for the need for succession planning next year and to see where those things go. And I certainly am excited to see it.
I'm not excited to see it because I actually think the blessing that we had this year, I think will come back to reap later next year.
Yeah,
they have the similar type
2, 3, 4 guys all at once.
Yeah, I won't be shocked if they have similar success, maybe not as deep of success even, but if they're a playoff team and win a playoff game, I have a hard time seeing all the coaches coming back and bringing back that front office. I think you could lose 2 to 3 key parts or components of what you're trying to build. And while I'd be interested to see if, hey, they lose Joe Shane, how do they do that? I don't want to see the shuffling of the deck if they lose Brian Dable, Leslie Frazier, and Joe Shane, or something to that effect, where you're really starting to shuffle the decks and you're hoping that these succession plans work out. I think that's very reasonable for Bills fans next year. I think that's going to be, once we start getting around week 10, 11, 12, and the names of interviews start coming up, I think Bills fans are going to start to really panic on Twitter when you start to see those names coming up as the first names for coaching searches.
No, and it's inevitable. We're going to see that. And I know, if you're looking to build the reason that Buffalo's successful, what do we talk about? It's because Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are hand in hand and in lockstep strategically. Well, what if a team decides that, the best way to do that is to offer Joe Shane and Brian Dable together, and that Brian Dable was brought in afterwards. He doesn't have a ton of connections on the offense, but the one guy that he brought with him was Shea Tierney.
Sure.
So, my worst case scenario is that Joe Shane, Brian Dable, and Shea Tierney all leave together and go somewhere. But those are the good problems to deal with when you're a successful team and things are going well. If our season is so good and the offense is so explosive that we lose another group of coaches, that's a good problem to deal with. And that, like I said, I'm not excited about it, but that's the kind of thing I'll trade off in how it goes.
Yeah.
So as we go forward, remember, give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review wherever you're listening to this. It helps a ton, especially during the off season as we get ramped up, ready to get into camp and all the exciting things there. Tell people about what we have going on. We're going to dive into our offensive positions going forward. So we've got offensive line and wide receivers and tight ends and running backs and quarterbacks and all the exciting parts of what we have, talking about those over the next couple weeks here. And excited to be able to kind of talk through those things and get you guys ready for training camp. We've got a really exciting season ahead of us. Go on over and check out the Underdog Fantasy app. Use the promo code COVER1. You get $25 free to be able to go in there and play around. It's going to be a lot of fun this year. You can prove how much smarter you are than myself and probably lose to Aaron, but you have to deal with that. come on over, give us a shout out to be able to do that, and sign up for the Cover One Premium service. You can jump into the Cover One Slack channel, check out all the awesome work by Rob Quinn and our man Kyle Salagi. It's so much good stuff going on. Aaron, where can the good people find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Aaron Quinn 716. But I really want to say, as one of the leading Siran Neal stands on the internet, go check out Rob's interview with Siran Neal. Good stuff out there. Some interesting takeaways. I think the thing I found that I walked away with the most was him talking about Lorenzo Alexander and leaning on Zoe to become a good special teams player. It's sort of how Zoe was able to carve out his career and change who he was. That was an interesting part of that. But go check that out. Rob's doing great work here at Cover One, so make sure on that. So I know there's at least dozens of me type Siran Neal stands out there. So go make sure, if you haven't checked it out, go check out Rob's work there.
All right, you guys can find me at Greg Thompson, hanging out on Twitter, hanging out in the Cover One Slack channel. But we appreciate you guys being with us tonight. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are